Before we dive into today's intense story, a quick reminder. Over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but aren't subscribed. If you enjoy content like this, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if you find this story gripping, don't forget to like the video. It really helps us out.
I don't know exactly when things began to unravel. If you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you I was happily married, comfortable, settled, safe. But safety, I've come to learn, is not the same as love, and comfort can sometimes dull the senses until you no longer recognize your own reflection. My name doesn't matter. I'm just one of many women who made a mistake, a choice, or maybe a series of choices that led to consequences I can't undo. It started quietly, subtly. My husband, Ray, wasn't a bad man. He worked hard, paid the bills, and rarely raised his voice. But somewhere between work promotions and late dinners, between our son's football practices and my part-time shifts at the library, we stopped looking at each other like we used to. Our conversations became transactional. What time is dinner? Did you take the car in? Can you pick up groceries? It was like sharing a house with a coworker you didn't dislike but had nothing in common with anymore. I told myself it was normal. After all, who has the time or energy for grand romance when there's laundry to fold and mortgages to pay? Still, something ached inside me. A strange, hollow ache I didn't know how to describe, like I was living someone else's life. And then came Aaron. He wasn't anyone special in the grand scheme of things, not richer or more handsome than my husband, but he saw me. I mean, really saw me. It sounds cliché, I know, like something out of a second-rate movie. But when you've spent years feeling invisible, even the simplest attention can feel like sunlight after a long winter. Aaron worked at the community center 2 streets over. I first met him when I signed up for a weekend ceramics class. It was something small, an attempt to feel like myself again. He was just a volunteer, helping out with materials and cleanup. I noticed his easy smile, how he always remembered everyone's name, how he asked questions and actually listened. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. That's what drew me in. At first, we barely spoke, a few polite exchanges, but as weeks passed, our conversations lengthened. We talked about books, travel, childhood memories. He told me about his time teaching abroad, his love for old music, how he wanted to write one day. I told him about my job, my son, my regrets. There were so many of those. He never once asked about my husband. Maybe he assumed I was single. I never corrected him. Not at first. Maybe I liked the illusion. But soon the guilt started creeping in. Not because I had done anything physical, because I hadn't, but emotionally. I knew I was drifting. I found myself dressing nicer on class days, wearing lipstick I hadn't touched in years. I'd check the mirror twice before heading out. My heart would skip when I saw him leaning by the window with clay-streaked hands and that calm look in his eyes. Still, I told myself it was innocent. Until the evening, he walked me to my car and said, "I look forward to these Saturdays more than I should." It hung in the air like mist. I didn't respond. I just smiled and left. But that sentence echoed in my head the entire drive home. I spent the next few days trying to bury it. I cooked Ray's favorite dinner, sat with him to watch a documentary he liked, but our conversation was still as empty as ever. He didn't notice my efforts, or if he did, he didn't comment. He ate, nodded, then went back to checking emails. That hollowness in me deepened. When I returned to the next class, Aaron handed me a tiny sculpture he had made. It was nothing fancy, just a flower, delicate, fragile, with petals slightly chipped. "Thought you might like it," he said. "You mentioned daisies last week." I held it in my hand, stunned. It was such a small gesture, but it meant more than it should have. Someone remembered what I said. Someone cared enough to make something for me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the sculpture in a drawer, afraid Ray would see it and ask questions I couldn't answer. Days turned into weeks. The line between friendship and something more became thinner. There was never a moment where things exploded, No kiss in the rain, no dramatic declarations, just a slow erosion of boundaries. Aaron and I began messaging occasionally, book recommendations, silly memes, quotes, and then more personal things. One night he told me, "You always seem so sad when you say goodbye." That one broke me, because I was sad, not just about leaving him, but about the life I had built, a life where I had forgotten who I was, where I was just a role to fill, wife, mother, employee, never myself. Then one afternoon, I lied. I told Ray I had an extra shift, but instead I went with Aaron to a nearby lake. We just talked, walked, laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in years, and I remember thinking, this is wrong, this is dangerous, but it feels like breathing again. I wish I could say that's where it ended, that I came to my senses and returned home, confessed everything, and worked things out. But that's not what happened. Aaron kissed me that day, a brief, uncertain kiss, full of questions neither of us dared voice aloud. And I let him. I didn't pull away. I didn't think of my husband. I thought of myself, for the first time in years. After that, I spiraled. The guilt and the thrill tangled together. I'd go home to Ray, serve him dinner, and feel like a traitor. But when he didn't ask where I'd been, when he didn't notice how shaken I was, part of me felt justified, like his neglect had somehow given me permission. I know how that sounds. I know it's wrong. One night, after Ray went to bed, I sat on the kitchen floor crying. Not because I had been caught, because I hadn't, but because I had become someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't the kind of person who lied, who sneaked around, and yet here I was. I tried pulling back. I told Aaron we needed space, that I was confused. He respected it, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Ray still hadn't noticed, or maybe he had but didn't care enough to ask. One evening, I found Aaron waiting outside the center after I'd skipped class for 2 weeks. He looked tired. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," he said. I broke down. We talked for hours in his car. I told him everything about my marriage, my fears, my guilt. He didn't offer solutions. He just listened. And then he said something I still carry with me. You don't owe anyone your unhappiness, but you do owe yourself honesty. That sentence shook me more than anything, because for the first time I realized this wasn't about Aaron or Ray. It was about me. About a woman who had given so much to everyone else that she forgot she was a person too. That night, I drove home with a decision in my heart. I wouldn't keep lying, not to Ray, not to Aaron, and not to myself. I had to tell the truth. I didn't know what would come of it, whether my marriage would survive, whether Aaron and I had a future. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of who I used to be. I owed myself more than that. The next morning felt different. The air in our house was heavy, or maybe it was just me, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee machine, unable to bring myself to press the button. My hands were trembling. Ray came in, still half asleep, mumbling about needing to leave early for a client meeting. He looked at his phone, walked right past me, and poured himself cereal. He didn't notice my shaking, or the tears I blinked away quickly. Maybe he was used to not seeing me. Maybe I had been invisible for so long that my silence had become part of the furniture. As he put on his shoes, I followed him to the door. "Ray," I said. He looked up briefly. "Yeah?" "I need to talk to you. Tonight. Please. Don't be late." He hesitated like it caught him off guard, then nodded and left. I spent the whole day pacing, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, checking the clock every 15 minutes. I rehearsed what I would say over and over in my mind, but no version sounded right. Every sentence either felt too cruel or too vague. How do you tell someone you betrayed them without destroying them? When Ray walked in that evening, something was different in his face. He looked cautious, guarded. as if he already knew what I was about to say and he was bracing for impact. We sat down at the table in silence. I started softly. "I haven't been honest with you, and I need to be." He didn't interrupt. He just stared at me, expression unreadable. I told him everything, not with details meant to hurt him, but with truths meant to free us both. I told him I felt alone, invisible, that I had let my loneliness lead me down a road I wasn't proud of, that I had formed a connection with someone else, not physical at first, but real nonetheless, that I hadn't planned it, that I hadn't been looking for it, but that it had happened, and it had made me realize how lost I'd become. When I was done, I expected shouting, anger, maybe even something being thrown across the room. But Ray just sat there, his face pale, his mouth tight. Then he said, "I knew." My breath caught. "I knew something was wrong for months. I saw the way you smiled less around me. I saw you dressing differently, staying out longer. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was imagining things, that we were just going through a rough patch." He paused, and then I stopped caring. That hurt more than any insult would have. "I figured maybe you'd come back around, or maybe you wouldn't. But either way, I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know, because if I asked, I'd have to admit I lost you a long time ago." I stared at him, my throat dry. "Ray, I'm sorry. I'm not angry," he said, almost too calmly. "I'm tired and sad and confused, but not angry. We both let this happen. Maybe you stepped out first, but I checked out long before that." The silence that followed was deafening. He stood up, walked to the sink, and poured himself a glass of water with hands that weren't entirely steady. "So what now?" he asked without turning around. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just know I can't keep pretending. I don't want to lie to you or myself anymore." He turned back to face me. His eyes were red but dry. "Do you love him?" he asked. "I don't know. I think I love what he reminded me of, what I used to feel, but love? That's more complicated." He nodded slowly, then walked past me, up the stairs. I heard the bedroom door close but not slam. That night, I slept on the couch. Or at least, I tried to. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every sign we both ignored, every word I should have said years ago. The next few days were hollow. We moved around each other like ghosts. Our son, thankfully, was away on a school trip, and I was grateful for the space. But the silence between Ray and me grew heavier. At times I wanted to scream just to break it. Finally, after 3 days, he asked if we could talk. We sat in the same spot at the dining table. This time, I let him speak first. "I think we should separate for a while," he said. I expected it. It still hurt. "I don't hate you," he added quickly, "but I don't know who you are anymore. And honestly, I'm not sure who I am either. I think we've been wearing masks for years. Maybe we both need time to figure out if there's anything left beneath them." I nodded, tears brimming. "I understand." He looked down. "I never thought it would end like this." Neither did I. We decided he would stay at his brother's place for a few weeks. I helped him pack. It felt strange, too gentle for something so painful, like we were closing a chapter in a book we'd both stopped reading long ago. The morning he left, he paused at the door. "Take care of yourself." "You too," I said. And then he was gone. I expected to feel relief, but all I felt was grief, not just for the marriage, but for the woman I used to be, the one who believed love was enough, the one who believed a good life meant simply staying. I didn't contact Aaron. Not at first. I needed time to be alone with my thoughts. I wasn't ready to replace one confusion with another. I needed to know that if I reached for something new, it wasn't just to fill a void, but life doesn't wait for clarity. One afternoon, Aaron showed up outside my house. He hadn't messaged. He just stood there with the same calm patience that had drawn me in months before. I heard what happened, he said. "You don't owe me anything, but I wanted you to know. I care, and I'm not here to make things harder." I invited him in. We sat on the porch in silence for a while. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," I said, "but I did." "You're human," he replied. "We all break sometimes. What matters is what we do afterward." We didn't kiss. We didn't talk about love. We just sat there. Two people who had crossed a line neither of us had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, I began the slow work of rebuilding. Not a marriage, not a romance, just myself. I started therapy. I took long walks. I joined a book club. I apologized to Ray again, this time not expecting forgiveness, just offering truth, and he thanked me. Not because it fixed anything, but because it helped him begin his own healing. Eventually, I met Aaron for coffee again. This time, we talked about boundaries, about timing, about choices. I told him I wasn't ready for anything serious. He smiled. "I'll wait, or I won't. But I want you to find yourself first, whoever that ends up being." And that felt like the first kind of love I could truly respect. Time moved forward, as it always does. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and slowly the chaos that had defined my life began to settle. After Ray moved out, the house felt cavernous. Every sound echoed. Every creak in the floor felt louder. I caught myself walking around quietly, as if someone might hear, even though there was no one left to disturb. I spent the first week avoiding mirrors, unable to face myself fully, but eventually I forced myself to stop hiding. I realized I couldn't keep living in a space so full of old memories and silent ghosts. The couch where Ray used to fall asleep after work, the kitchen table where I had once confessed everything, the hallway where my son would leave his shoes. It was too much. So I made the decision to move out. I found a small apartment not far from our old neighborhood. Just one bedroom, a narrow balcony, and a cozy little kitchen that overlooked a street filled with people I didn't know. It wasn't fancy. It didn't carry history. And that was exactly what I needed. Something untouched by my past, something I could shape on my own. The day I moved in, I brought only what I truly needed: a few boxes of clothes, a kettle, my favorite books, and the little clay daisy Aaron had given me. I placed the sculpture by the window where the light hit it in the afternoon, not as a reminder of him, but of the moment I began waking up to myself again. I didn't rush into rebuilding my life. I didn't try to fill the silence. For once, I allowed the quiet to teach me. I spent long evenings journaling. I went for walks without a destination. I learned how to be alone, really alone, and not feel empty. Aaron reached out a few times, kind, respectful messages asking how I was. He never pressured, never pushed. I responded politely but distantly. I told him I needed time, and to my surprise, he understood completely. "It's okay," he wrote once. "I don't want to be a chapter that confuses your healing. Take the space you need. If there's something real between us, it will still be there when you're ready." I didn't know if I would ever be ready. Not for romance, not for another relationship built on the ruins of a broken self. But his words gave me comfort, because they weren't about possession or longing. They were about peace. Ray and I talked occasionally, mostly about our son, who had sensed that something had changed but hadn't asked questions. We agreed not to involve him in the details yet. He deserved to live his teenage years without carrying the burden of our adult mistakes. Ray was distant but not cruel. I could tell he was hurting, but he had his own ways of healing. Golf with friends, long drives alone, therapy sessions he never told me about, but I heard of through mutual friends. He was rebuilding, too, in his own quiet way. I learned to forgive myself, slowly. That was the hardest part. It's one thing to confess a mistake. It's another to truly sit with it, hold it in your hands, examine it, and still say, "I am worthy of being better." There were days I questioned everything. Had I ruined a marriage that could have been saved? Had I betrayed a man who, despite his faults, had never betrayed me? Was I selfish? Or was I just human? The answers weren't clean. Life rarely is. But as I learned to accept the gray areas, I began to heal. I took up painting, not because I was good at it, but because it made me lose track of time. I read books I had never gotten around to. I started a small online journal, anonymous, just a space to reflect and write without judgment. Strangers left comments like, "This sounds like my story," or "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." It reminded me that I wasn't alone in my imperfections. Eventually, I met with Aaron again. It wasn't planned. I bumped into him at the bookstore I frequented now. He was holding a copy of a novel I had once recommended. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied. There was no tension, just familiarity. We decided to grab coffee, not as anything romantic, just two people catching up. We talked about work, about writing, about healing. I told him about my new apartment, my journal, my therapy. He listened, smiled, shared his own journey of pulling away, of realizing he couldn't fix anyone, only support them. When we finished our drinks, he asked, "Are you happy?" I paused. "I'm becoming happy," I said honestly. "Not every day, but more than I used to be." He nodded with a soft smile. "That's good. That's more than most people can say." He didn't ask to see me again. He didn't need to. There was no pressure, just respect. As I walked home that evening, I realized something important. I didn't need to go back to who I was before the affair. That woman was gone, and that was okay. Because who I was becoming was stronger, more honest, and more alive than I had been in years. One night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. A warm breeze touched my skin. I closed my eyes and listened, not for answers, but for the sound of my own breath, steady and calm. I was no longer trying to escape my past or rush toward a future. I was here, present, healing. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being alone with myself. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Not every love is meant to last, but every ending can be a beginning, if you let it. I had made mistakes. I had hurt people. I had been hurt, but I had also learned. I had grown. And now I was writing a new chapter. One where I wasn't defined by my role as a wife, or a mother, or a mistake. One where I was simply me. And that, in the end, was enough.